There's something we need to talk about, and it's uncomfortable, it's raw, it's the kind of thing most people avoid because it brings up fear, shame, and uncertainty. But we can't heal what we refuse to name, so let's name it: narcissism. Now, before you jump into images of grandiosity or spotlight-stealing drama, I want to tell you something. Narcissism isn't just loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's charming. And sometimes it's devastating. Here's what I've learned. Narcissism is not about self-love. It's about self-protection. It's a fortress built around deep insecurity. But here's the thing. When we don't recognize it, we get caught in the crossfire. Confused, drained, disoriented. So how do we cut through the fog? How do we see what's behind the mask? You ask one question, and here it is. Can you tell me about a time you were wrong and how you handled it? Now stop, watch, breathe, because the answer to that question will tell you everything you need to know. A person grounded in courage, empathy, and growth will pause. They might wince, reflect, maybe even laugh a little. Then they'll tell you a story. But a narcissist, they'll dodge, deflect, blame. They might even lash out. Why? Because accountability feels like annihilation to someone who's built their worth on being right, unmired, untouchable. See, narcissists thrive in ambiguity. They twist words, rewrite stories, and gaslight realities, but clarity, it's their kryptonite. That one question forces a mirror in front of them, and narcissism can't survive reflection. So if you're wondering if someone is safe, if your gut keeps whispering, this feels off, but your mind can't quite pin it down, ask the question. Because truth doesn't tremble in the face of vulnerability. Only ego does. And here's what I want you to remember. You are not here to carry someone else's fragile identity. You are not here to cushion their shame. You are here to live fully, love bravely, and protect your peace. So, ask the question, let the answer lead you to clarity, and then choose yourself. Every single time. When we hear the word narcissist, the image that often comes to mind is someone who's obsessed with their reflection, constantly bragging, or dominating every room they walk into. But that's just the surface. It's the performance. And what I've come to understand through years of studying vulnerability, shame, and human connection is this. Narcissism is not about having too much self-esteem. It's actually the exact opposite. It's about living with such a fragile sense of self that the entire personality becomes armor. Narcissists don't love themselves too much. They love a curated, untouchable image of themselves, and they're terrified of what lies underneath. Let's get something straight. Shame is the birthplace of narcissism. When someone grows up feeling like they're never enough, never smart enough, strong enough, beautiful enough, lovable enough, they either internalize that pain and collapse inward, or they create a persona so grand it hides the wound. Narcissism is the latter. It's shame dressed in confidence. And that faux confidence has to be fed constantly through praise, attention, validation. But here's the thing, it's never enough. Because no amount of admiration can ever touch the core wound that says, if people really saw me, they wouldn't stay. We tend to think narcissists feel superior. In reality, they feel deeply inadequate. But instead of owning and healing those feelings, they build a defense so strong that admitting even one flaw feels like a threat to their survival. So they deflect, they blame, they lie. They make you question your memory, your worth, your instincts. And the more threatened they feel, the more aggressive that defense becomes. This isn't about ego strength. This is about ego fragility. A healthy ego can hold imperfection. A narcissistic ego shatters at the first sign of vulnerability. And this is where it gets dangerous, because when someone is fueled by unprocessed shame, they don't just protect themselves, they project their pain onto the people closest to them. They criticize your character to avoid looking at their own. They invalidate your feelings to avoid their own discomfort. And they punish honesty because the truth threatens the mask. Narcissists don't just need to be right, they need to be worshipped. They need to feel superior to stay safe. And anything that challenges that illusion, whether it's feedback, boundaries, or emotional depth, gets labeled as an attack. Now, this isn't to excuse the harm they cause, but it is to understand it, because understanding the emotional root of narcissism helps us make sense of what often feels senseless. It helps us realize, oh, this isn't about me. This is their wound acting out. That shift in perspective is powerful. It doesn't make the behavior okay, but it gives us clarity. It reminds us that narcissistic behavior is a form of armor. And people don't wear armor unless they're deeply afraid of being hurt. But here's the hard part. You can't love someone out of their shame if they refuse to look at it. You can't fix, rescue, or appease your way into being treated with kindness. Narcissism is not a lack of love, it's a lack of self-ownership. And as long as someone is more committed to their image than to intimacy, you will always feel like you're walking on eggshells because you are. You're constantly managing their emotional state so they don't erupt. That's not love. That's survival. And it is exhausting. So when we talk about narcissism, we're not just talking about big egos or toxic traits. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about identity formed in the presence of shame and absence of accountability. And while that deserves compassion, it also demands boundaries. Because until a narcissist is willing to confront their shame and dismantle their armor, they will continue to hurt the people who love them most. Not out of hate, but out of fear. And fear that's never acknowledged turns into control, manipulation, and disconnection. That's the truth beneath the mask. There's a moment in every relationship, whether romantic, professional, or familial, where you stop and think, something isn't right here. I don't feel safe, but I can't explain why. That's the moment clarity is trying to find its way in. That's the whisper of your intuition. And yet, because so many of us are wired for connection, we tend to override that whisper. We rationalize. We explain it away. We give people the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt is growing louder. So what do we do when we feel uncertain? When something feels off, but we're not sure how to name it? We ask a question that reveals what's underneath. The question is simple but seismic. Can you tell me about a time you were wrong and how you handled it? Now, it might sound like an interview question. It might even feel casual at first glance. But make no mistake, this is a mirror. This question shines a light directly into the soul of someone's emotional maturity. It cuts through charm, performance, and charisma. It's not about the story they tell, it's about how they tell it. Do they own the mistake? Do they show humility? Do they express empathy for the people impacted by their actions? Or do they spin it into a blame game? Watch closely, because what comes next will tell you everything you need to know about whether you're sitting across from someone safe or someone dangerous. You see, vulnerability and accountability are two sides of the same coin. A grounded person, someone who has done the work to face their imperfections, will meet that question with pause, maybe even some discomfort. They'll reflect, they'll probably get a little quiet, but eventually they'll tell you a story, not a perfect one, but a real one. They'll own what they did, name what they learned, and most importantly, they'll share how they made it right. That kind of self-awareness doesn't come from theory. It comes from healing. It comes from being willing to sit with shame and not let it define you. But a narcissist, they can't tolerate this question, not even a little. Because for them, being wrong equals being weak, and weakness is intolerable. So they'll do one of a few things. They'll dodge the question entirely. They'll tell a story where they kind of made a mistake, but someone else was really at fault. Or they'll laugh it off, make it sound like no big deal. Some will even turn it back on you. Why would you ask me that? What are you trying to say? That right there, that's deflection. That's a defense mechanism built to protect a paper-thin identity. Because the truth is, they don't just resist accountability, they fear it. This question is powerful because it leaves no room for manipulation. You're not accusing, you're not confronting, you're inviting honesty. And in that space, a person's relationship with vulnerability becomes crystal clear. Are they willing to be seen, or are they too busy managing their image to tell the truth? That's the heart of it. You're not just listening for the words. They might be smooth, practiced, even convincing. You're listening for emotional congruence. Do their words and energy align? Do they tell the story like someone who's grown, or like someone who still feels like the victim of their own choices? What makes this question so potent is that it bypasses intellect and dives straight into emotional integrity. It's not about whether someone's been wrong before. We all have. It's about whether they can hold that truth without shame eating them alive. It's about whether they value truth over ego. Narcissists can't handle the loss of control that comes with being exposed. And this question, it exposes what they've spent years trying to hide, that they are human, flawed, and just like the rest of us. But instead of finding freedom in that humanity, they run from it. And anyone who runs from their own truth will never be able to honor yours. So when you feel that flicker of uncertainty, when your gut says this feels off, don't push it down. Don't silence yourself. Ask the question, not as a trap, not as a test, but as a truth teller. Because how someone responds to that one simple, grounding question will either draw you into deeper trust or deliver the clarity you need to walk away. Either way, you win, because clarity is kindness. And when we lead with clarity, we stop abandoning ourselves to keep the peace. There's a moment in every hard conversation, whether it's about boundaries, mistakes, or unmet needs, when someone reveals who they really are. And it's almost never in the words. It's in the pause, the posture, the breath. It's in the energy. We're often taught to listen closely to what people say. And yes, words matter. Language shapes reality. But if you want to understand someone's truth, if you want to feel the emotional temperature of the room, you need to watch how they respond. Because words can lie, reactions don't. See, someone who's emotionally grounded will respond with presence. You'll feel it. Their tone softens, they lean in, they're curious, not defensive. And even if they're caught off guard or feel uncomfortable, they stay with you in the conversation. That's a big deal. Because staying present when it's hard is a skill. And it tells you that this person is capable of intimacy. They're not trying to escape the moment, they're trying to understand it. And you can't fake that kind of emotional safety. On the flip side, someone who's emotionally guarded or operating from shame will show you resistance almost immediately. Their jaw might tighten, their eyes might narrow, their body might shift away. Or they may just interrupt you, cut you off mid-sentence, or throw the conversation in a totally different direction. They might even smile, but watch for that too. Sometimes a smile isn't kindness. Sometimes it's condescension, a way to cover up discomfort or dismiss your experience without actually saying anything cruel out loud. That's not emotional maturity. That's emotional manipulation. This is where we need to trust the wisdom of the body. Your nervous system picks up on energy before your brain can name it. So if you're in a conversation and suddenly you feel dizzy, small, ashamed, or like you just said something wrong when you know you haven't, that's a cue. That's your body whispering, something isn't safe here. Trust that. Because you don't need a confession to know when you're being emotionally cornered. You just need to listen to your own nervous system. That's where the real data lives. When we watch how people respond, we start to see patterns. Does the person always make themselves the victim, no matter what the story is? Do they get angry when asked to take accountability? Do they try to confuse the issue, bring up old, unrelated things, or turn the conversation back on you? These aren't just bad habits. These are signs of someone who has not developed the capacity to self-reflect. And no matter how eloquent they are, no matter how convincing their explanations sound, their reactions will always tell the truth their words tried to cover up. One of the most important things we can do in our relationships, especially when we're trying to figure out if someone is trustworthy, is this: believe the response. Don't rationalize it. Don't overanalyze it. Don't tell yourself they're just tired, or they're going through a lot, or they didn't mean it. Believe the energy you felt. Believe the shift in the room. People who are willing to grow might still struggle in tough conversations, but they won't try to punish you for speaking. There's a difference between someone who's defensive and someone who's dangerous. Learn to tell the difference. And here's the hard truth. Many narcissists are expert communicators. They've studied the script. They've learned how to mimic empathy. They figured out what to say to sound self-aware. But you can't fake nervous system regulation. You can't fake presence. You can't fake that soft, quiet courage that shows up when someone is really listening, not just with their ears, but with their heart. And when you find someone who responds that way, someone who stays with you even when it's hard, that's gold. That's rare. That's what trust is built on. But when someone's response makes you shrink, second guess, or go silent, that's not a safe space. And no amount of charm can make up for that. Let's get something clear right off the bat. Mistakes are part of being human. Every single one of us, no matter how self-aware or well-intentioned, will get it wrong sometimes. We'll say something that lands the wrong way. We'll fail to show up when someone needed us. We'll act from fear instead of love. And that's not a character flaw. That's life. That's being real. What separates healthy relationships from harmful ones isn't the absence of mistakes. It's what happens after the mistake is made. In emotionally safe, grounded relationships, accountability is not a threat. It's a bridge. It's what allows us to repair the rupture, reconnect, and build trust. When someone can say, I messed up. I see how it hurt you. Here's what I'm doing to make it right. They're showing you that the relationship matters more than their ego. That kind of vulnerability is powerful. It doesn't shrink us, it strengthens us, because it says, I can hold space for my imperfection and I can honor your experience at the same time. That's the root of real emotional maturity. But narcissists, they don't do repair, they do revision. When they're confronted with a mistake, they don't reflect, they deflect. They rewrite the story. Suddenly, it wasn't their fault. You were too sensitive. You misunderstood. You brought it on yourself. the focus shifts from their behavior to your reaction. And now you're on trial. That's not just emotional immaturity, it's a form of manipulation. It's not about what happened. It's about escaping responsibility at all costs. Because for narcissists, admitting fault doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels like annihilation. And here's why. Narcissism is built on a false self, a constructed identity designed to protect the individual from deep, unresolved shame. When that false self is challenged, when someone points out a flaw, a failure, or misstep, it's like cracking the glass on a very fragile mirror. And instead of sitting with the discomfort, learning from it, and making amends, they go into survival mode. They'll gaslight, guilt trip, attack, or go completely silent. These are not communication strategies. These are defense mechanisms. And they are meant to do one thing: avoid accountability. One of the most telling signs of a narcissist is their inability to say a real, unqualified, "I'm sorry." If you do get an apology, it's usually laced with conditions. "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "I'm sorry, but I wouldn't have said that if you hadn't." That's not ownership. That's image management. And over time, it erodes the foundation of the relationship, because you can't build connection with someone who refuses to stand in their own truth. True connection requires repair, and repair requires responsibility. It's easy to fall into the trap of trying to teach a narcissist how to take accountability. You explain, you plead, you bring examples. You think, if I just say it the right way, maybe they'll understand. But here's the thing, they often do understand. They're just unwilling. Not because they don't care, but because they've built their identity around being right, admired, and unchallenged. And challenging that self-impunity feels like a death sentence. So they double down, and you end up carrying the weight of the relationship alone, constantly apologizing for things you didn't do, or worse, believing you caused the harm they refuse to own. Healthy people don't fear accountability. They welcome it, not because it's comfortable, but because they know it's where trust is born. They understand that being wrong doesn't make them unworthy. It makes them human, and they're willing to own their part, not just to clear their conscience, but to protect the connection. That's what love looks like in action, not perfection, not performance, but the courage to say, "I hurt you, and I'm here to make it right." If someone can't meet you there, no amount of explaining will build the bridge. Accountability is the doorway to real intimacy. And not everyone is willing to walk through it. Vulnerability is not weakness. I've spent the last 2 decades studying shame, courage, and connection, and I will say this until my last breath. Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, empathy, and creativity. It's the courage to show up and be seen. It's telling the truth about what hurts, what we need, what scares us. It's saying, here I am, not perfect, not bulletproof, but real. And in safe relationships, that kind of courage is sacred. It's met with softness, with presence, with care. But in unsafe relationships, especially with narcissists, vulnerability doesn't get honored. It gets weaponized. Let me be clear. Narcissists are not drawn to your strength. They're drawn to your vulnerability, to your empathy, your tenderness, your open-hearted nature, because those things make you easier to manipulate. When you share your story, they don't see an opportunity for connection. They see an opportunity for control. So you confide in them, thinking, finally, someone I can be real with. But then slowly, subtly, the shift begins. That thing you told them in confidence gets turned into a jab during an argument, or it becomes evidence in their case against you. They don't just fail to protect your vulnerability, they punish you for ever showing it. This is one of the most painful realizations in narcissistic relationships, that the moments you thought were intimate were actually being stored away as ammunition. You opened your heart, they took notes. And when you stop agreeing, when you start pulling away, when you set a boundary, suddenly your deepest truths are being thrown back at you. Not out of concern, not out of love, out of strategy. It's meant to destabilize you, to keep you small. Because if you start to stand in your truth, they lose control. And for someone who's terrified of emotional exposure, control is everything. Healthy people don't use your pain against you. They don't store your tears as leverage. They listen without judgment. They hold your story with care. They say, "Thank you for trusting me." That is the difference. A healthy person knows that vulnerability is sacred ground. They don't need to agree with everything you feel, but they never dismiss it. Never minimize it, never weaponize it, because they understand to harm someone through their vulnerability is to break something holy. And they refuse to be the person who causes that kind of rupture. And here's where shame comes into play. Narcissists are deeply shame-based. Their whole personality is built to outrun the feeling that they're not enough. So when you show vulnerability, it triggers them. Not because you've done something wrong, but because it confronts them with something they cannot tolerate, emotional depth. Vulnerability invites authenticity, and authenticity invites reflection. That's terrifying to someone who's spent a lifetime hiding from themselves, so they shut it down quickly and often cruelly. It's not about you. It's about what your openness mirrors back to them. This is why it's so important to notice what happens after you share something tender. Not just what they say, but how you feel. Do you feel safe, seen, or do you feel exposed, embarrassed, like you want to take it all back? That feeling in your chest, that pit in your stomach, that's your nervous system telling you the truth. This is not safe. You should never feel like you have to armor up after being honest. You should never feel like you've just handed someone a weapon disguised as your story. Because real connection isn't about performance. It's about mutual care. Vulnerability is a gift. And when you give it to someone, you're offering them your heart in cupped hands. A narcissist doesn't know what to do with that except try to control it. But someone who's emotionally whole, someone who's doing their work, someone who sees you as a person and not a pawn, they'll treat your vulnerability like the treasure it is. Will meet it with reverence, not ridicule, with grace, not games, because they know it's not just what you share that matters, it's how the other person holds it. There's a subtle but powerful difference between connection and performance. One is rooted in authenticity, the other in image. One says, "I want to be seen." The other says, "I want to be admired." And when it comes to relationships, whether romantic, professional, or familial, that difference matters more than we realize. Real connection requires presence. Performance requires an audience. And a narcissist, they don't enter conversations to connect. They enter them to control the narrative, protect their ego, and keep the spotlight exactly where they want it, on them. Here's the thing, we're all capable of performing from time to time, especially when we feel unsure, exposed, or afraid. That's human. But when someone lives there, when performance is the default, the go-to, the whole operating system, that's not just a habit. It's a mask, a false self. And narcissists have perfected that mask. They know how to say all the right things. They know how to charm, impress, even mimic empathy. But what they're giving you isn't connection. It's a carefully crafted version of who they think you want them to be. It's a script, not a soul. And at first, it's convincing. You feel seen, validated, even swept off your feet. They tell you stories about their past, their struggles, their dreams, and they do it with flair, with emotion, with detail. It's intoxicating. But here's what you'll start to notice if you look closer. The stories aren't about depth. They're about impact. They're curated to provoke a reaction, sympathy, awe, admiration. Everything is about managing your perception of them. And the second your response doesn't match the script, they shut down, get cold, or change tactics entirely. That's because narcissists aren't engaging in a conversation. They're directing a scene. And if you step out of your assigned role, if you stop being the admirer, the cheerleader, the rescuer, they don't adapt. They retaliate. Because this isn't about two people relating. It's about them maintaining power. Performance isn't about being known. It's about being in control. And when you're in a relationship with someone who's performing, you can feel it. Something is always off. It looks like intimacy, but it never feels safe. You're talking, but not touching anything real. Meanwhile, connection, real, embodied, grounded connection is messy. It's unscripted. It's built in silence as much as speech. It doesn't demand a reaction. It invites presence. When someone is truly connecting with you, they aren't trying to impress you. They're trying to meet you. And that requires them to step off the stage and into the unknown. That requires courage, humility, the willingness to be changed by the conversation. Narcissists don't want to be changed. They want to be praised. And that's why connection feels impossible with them. Because where there's no humility, there can be no intimacy. And the cost of this kind of performance is steep. When you're with someone who's always performing, you start to question your own reality. You feel unseen, even in the middle of what seems like closeness. You find yourself doubting your instincts, wondering, am I expecting too much? But you're not. You're just noticing the lack of reciprocity. Because in a performance, the energy only flows one way. You give, they receive. You listen, they monologue. You open up, they use your vulnerability to deepen their spotlight, or worse, to disappear when it's your turn. That's not love. That's extraction. So ask yourself this: do I feel like a co-creator in this relationship, or an audience member? Do I feel like we're building something together or performing something for show? Real love doesn't need applause. It doesn't need scripts. It asks for honesty. And when someone chooses performance over presence, what they're really saying is, I want to be adored, not understood. But you deserve to be known fully, deeply, without condition. And that will never come from someone who's still hiding behind their own mask. So here's what I want you to remember. You don't need to interrogate, confront, or outsmart a narcissist to see them clearly. You just need to ask the right question and then watch. Watch the way they move when truth enters the room. Watch their relationship with vulnerability, with accountability, with the very idea that someone else's experience might matter as much as their own. Because the truth, it always reveals itself in the response, not the words, the energy, the posture, the silence. Healthy people are not perfect. They will mess up. They will fumble. They will feel uncomfortable when called in, but they will lean in, not lash out. They will take ownership. They will choose connection over control. They will meet your courage with their own. But narcissists, They'll punish your honesty. They'll turn your vulnerability into a weapon. They'll perform connection without ever stepping into it. And when that happens, when someone shows you that your truth is too inconvenient, too threatening, too much for them to handle, believe them. This isn't about judgment. It's about discernment. It's about protecting your peace, your heart, your truth. You don't need to convince someone to value your worth. You just need to be brave enough to stop explaining it to those who never will.